Good morning. I am Ross Fogelquist. Let us now go back in time at Fogelbo. Welcome to Fogelbo. I am Ross Fogelquist, the former proprietor of Fogelbo, and I want to extend a warm welcome to my home. My home and estate was called Fogelbo, and that means bird's nest in Swedish, and my name Fogelquist means bird on a branch. My parents bought this home in 1952, and I have been here ever since. I went to study in Europe for a year in Vienna, Austria. Otherwise, I have been here at Fogelbo, made 40 trips actually to Europe and visited a lot of friends and relatives there. So I'm always coming back with new additions to Fogelbo. My father often said many years ago when I got off the plane, I looked like a Bulgarian peddler with all my new acquisitions. A bit about Fogelbo. The house was built by Henry Steiner, who was one of the head carpenters at Timberline Lodge. And Steiner built over 100 cabins and houses, log cabins and houses, in the government zigzag area of Mount Hood. His cabins became very famous and were often featured in local magazines, newspapers, and television. He built this house for Swedish immigrants, Oscar Olsen, and they moved in here in 1941. The house has materials from Mount Hood, the stones, a lot of the logs were brought down from Mount Hood, and some of the logs actually came from trees on this property. He was such a unique craftsman. He built the whole house with no power tools at all. It was all handcrafted logs. The house has been featured many times in magazines, newspapers, and television, particularly during the holiday season. He was kind of the patriarch of the Steiner family, and through the years many members of the family have come, many generations of the family have come to see Fogelbo. His son, John Steiner, helped him, and John was here on a couple of occasions talking about how they built this home. If you are interested in Steiner houses and cabins, they have tours every year at Mount Hood. My parents were avid gardeners, and they built, built a lot of things in the yard, and my father took down about 9 trees, and we put in lawns and flowers and shrubs. And so after a little while, our home became kind of a center of gathering places for many organizations, and in the 70s the Scandinavians organizations started coming here and celebrating Midsummers and Christmas and Walpurgis night, and all kinds of events were going on here. Garrison Keeler came here as a fundraiser in 1992, did a show here in the backyard with about 300 people attending as a fundraiser for Nordic Northwest. The property was, gifted the property to the foundation in 2014. And so it is now a part of the wider 4.5 acre campus. So I have a life estate here, and so I am kind of the curator, I guess, of the museum. I've been always an avid collector, even when I was a little kid. This was many years ago. In the late 40s and early 50s, I would go into my Swedish grandfather's attic and see old things up there that I really liked. And my grandfather lived up near Yakima, Washington. They had a beautiful place in the country, and above his shop he had an attic full of old family things that were no longer used. So I would ask Grandpa, can I have this old lamp? Can I have this? Oh yeah, sure. He said, it's just a bunch of old young toast. You take any old things you want up there. So I would go out to the car carrying things, and the relatives saying, why are you taking that old junk home for? What are you going to do with that old stuff? Then about 50, 60 years later, they came in the house and they said, oh, how'd you get Grandpa's this? How come you have Grandma's this? Well, I was taking when I was a little kid. So I had a bad disease starting when I was young called collectoritis. My Swedish grandparents had a tremendous impact on me, and they lived in a Swedish community of Selah, Washington. And there I experienced a lot of Swedish immigrant culture. And my grandfather was a master craftsman of wood, and he was a carver also, and was an instructor of that in the Selah High School and the Perry Institute in Yakima, Washington. So I have a number of things from his collection. I really started collecting when I was employed as a German teacher and foreign student advisor in the Evergreen School District in 1965. And so then I started making numerous trips, as I said, to Europe. I enjoy going to auctions, estate sales, and garage sales. And I started collecting. I also, for 50 years, sold items here at an annual garage and antique sale here at Fogelbo. So the collection is always expanding, and I have centered a lot of my collection on folk art and textiles from the Scandinavian countries. Now I'm going to show you a few items from the living room collection. I have a number of wonderful old Norwegian carved cheese molds, and you see these in Scandinavia. They come apart actually like this, and I turned this one inside out because the carving was so unique. And so when you took the cheese or the butter out of the mold, you had a nice design in it. This is probably, a couple hundred years old. Along with that is this is a cheese box from Norway, and I have a number of them. This one is probably from the 1700s and is beautifully carved. And I bought this many, many years ago in Norway. This cheese box is from Vigeland in Norway, and it's round. And you notice how things are constructed. The wood was bent, soaked and bent, and then tied together with birch bark roots, and then the bottom was put in. There was wood pegs all around the bottom, so they were all very beautifully constructed. And so I have a number of those in the collection, and then I have tina boxes. Now you see the tina boxes around the house, like the doll and the horses. There's many of them around here. These tina boxes were used for nearly everything, and they were for storage, for going shopping, for taking things places, for a picnic. It was the era. And so again, these were soaked and bound together, and they were often ornately painted or carved or wood carved. And this one is very unique because some Swedish immigrant who came to Portland painted a picture of Mount Hood, and he was quite an accomplished artist, in the lid of this Tina box. So it's very unique. And I have about 35 Tina boxes of all sizes and shapes here in the house, and it was a very common household item. Interesting enough, these Dalarna horses, are called Dal has the horse from Dalarna, are still carved in the traditional way. People in the area around Mora and Nusnäs, where the story is, there's a small little, well, I couldn't call it a factory. There are about 3 people working there, and they cut out these forms like this and on a jigsaw, and then they train people in the region to carve these horses. So there they give them maybe 20 or 30 of these, and then they take them home and carve the horses different sizes, and then they bring them back to the little factory, and then there are girls there that paint the horses basically in orange, but there are other colors now, and they are locally trained artisans who do the traditional, well, it was called doll molding. That's the full art of that area on the horses. Now let me show you a Dalarna horse. This is a big fellow, and these horses are made in the area where my grandfather was born and raised, in Mora, Dalarna, Sweden. And these horses have become the symbol of Sweden. And everybody who goes to Sweden has to have a Dalarna horse. They're often orange, but now they have them in different colors. There are also pigs, roosters, and chickens, but the horse, this is a standard Dalarna horse. They started carving these many years ago in the 1700s. There are different stories about how they developed, but basically they were painted by carved and painted by local craftsmen in the Dalarna region. A phenomenal bowl, and it's from 1790, and it was you can see the beautiful carving and painting. Look at the handle and the painting inside. It was probably an ale bowl for a big Swedish or Norwegian wedding. And here you can see the date and the initials of the person involved. This was carved from a burl, from a tree. Very unique item. This is a wood carving. I have a number of carved figures from Sweden and Norway. This is probably the most famous of all the wood carvers in Norway, Henning. And Henning statues are very sought after. This was a large one of the fiddler, which is fiddle music, of course, was the main form of music for many decades or centuries in Scandinavia. And so this is a small Henning statue, and this is the larger one. Same as they were. These particular ones were always playing the fiddle, and the women were usually playing a lure. And then I have a big collection on the fireplace mantel from Sweden and different parts of Norway. Let's now look around the living room and see what else we can find here from the Nordic countries. I have a very prized textile. This one that extends along the wall here. It took a artisan 60 years to make that in southern Sweden, and it depicts the life of local kings and ceremonies and wedding ceremonies and parade, and that's probably 100 years old, and it's very unique. Below that, you see panels that are carved, and those were done by a local Norwegian carver here on the Oregon coast. The wonderful cabinet here, this rectangle cabinet, is one of two that I have in the home, and I was very fortunate to receive this from Marianne Brott. She was a very generous contributor to the Scandinavian Foundation, and she comes from a very famous aristocratic family in Sweden, and this was in her parents' summer estate on the west coast of Sweden near Marstrand, and there many aristocrats and also the King of Norway and Sweden would come for visits to their beautiful summer place on the coast of western Sweden. So it has a very unique history, and she's put together a wonderful book about her family. She comes from a very famous family, and that's another intriguing story which I won't go into now. She and her husband just recently donated the beautiful bronze animal statues that adorn the surroundings at Nordia House. So then the candlesticks is typical of a doll in a folk art. I have a number of smaller wall cabinets around the house here. One over there, and there's, if you look around, you'll see that there's tapestries and textiles hanging on the walls, and many of them depicted simple life, some with verses of songs and poetry and different figures, and they would use those to adorn their houses and to bring a little light to their decor. Here we have another corner of the living room with some interesting items. This little chest, and there are a number of chests here. I have this size, and I have you see the big ones behind me. They were, the bigger ones of course were brought over with the immigrants from Scandinavia. They were usually their dowry chests or hope chests, and they were often painted and dated and with the initials. And so they brought their worldly items on the boat when they came over, and I have quite a collection of them. They're very sought after now and very interesting. If they could tell stories, it would be very interesting. So this is just a little smaller chest, and they always had the little trap box here. And so there's another one behind me, and so that's those are interesting. Here is a very unique item, probably one of a kind. It's a Swedish or Norwegian, I'm not sure. They call it a spark. And here was the date, 1878. And originally, of course, they had long runners on it. And the children would sit here, one here and one here, and they would move the spark by with the left foot and the right foot on the blade, and they would glide through the snow. So they had a lot of snow and a lot of ice in Scandinavia, and these are old ice skates. They were one of the originals, I guess. And this is a lap doll, and this is very old, and it's from Sweden, and it's a typical lap in his costume with his paddle. This is an old Norwegian pipe, sea captain's pipe, and it's you had to have a lot of wind to smoke this one. The fiddler's case is from Norway, and it's again painted with the beautiful Norwegian folk designs, rose mauling, and in the case, of course, was the fiddle, and this fiddle belonged to one of the early Swedish fiddlers, Gus Gronquist, and he played for many of the Swedish midsummer events and different Swedish events in the turn of the last century. Next to that here we find a cradle, a chip-carved cradle, and that is from Norway. It's very old, and inside the cradle you see an old cheese box and a little girl doll from Rättvik in Dalarna, Sweden. Behind me is a Mora clock, and the Mora clock was made basically near Mora, around Mora, and in Dalarna, Sweden. And these clocks you found everywhere in Sweden, and they were very, very popular in the 17 and 1800s. This clock was made by a Swedish craftsman in California. I bought it from him, and a very famous Swedish folk artist, Lisa Nelson, painted it for me in Swedish folk art colors, and the doll molding, as it was called. And so it's dated in 1990, and it says Fogelbo on it. Now we're in the dining room area, and I have a couple of really nice, beautiful old cupboards. The one behind me is a Rättvik cupboard from the town of Rättvik in Dalarna, and it's from 1804, and it's all painted in the typical doll molding folk art, and it was painted by an artist named Olaf Hansen. And so I actually bought this on eBay many years ago, and it was shipped over here. And interesting enough, the shipping office was in Tigard, Oregon, so I didn't have far to go to fetch it. There are some other little items here. I have a number of these. They're little plant stands from Dalarna, Rättvik. The other cupboard is a wall cupboard, and these wall cupboards were quite elaborate. And most of the cupboards had a rack for spoons, and then there were different compartments. This one was made in 1840 from Sweden, and of course I have some old books there. Then this is another beautiful old container from Sweden with the folk art on it, and this is interesting. This has a little local history, and this fishing creel belonged to Oscar Näsström, who was an old Swedish immigrant who came from northern Sweden. This was his fishing basket, and it's all made of mostly birch. And so that came from his estate. He was a very dear old friend. Here we have a wonderful old tankard I obtained from Anna Lundin. It was from her family near Sola in Sweden, and the date is 75, and it was used for water or beer or any kind of liquids. And then this was the lid here, and so it was I have about 3 or 4 of these old tankards. They're really wonderful. Now we're in the kind of a little side room out of the kitchen. This is where I spend most of my time. The area is comfortably decorated. The bench and chairs here are and table are from Norway. And then we have some interesting things. Here is something that's quite intriguing. This was the way they measured things in the countryside in Scandinavia, and so you would hang the item that you're buying, and to check the weight there was all these little niches here indicating the of course a small amount of weight to the bigger items. So you would hang it here and then you go this way and so this is the way you weighed things when you bought them at the store. Now coffee was a real struggle. In the old days you bought your beans and this was a coffee roaster, and so you would roast this over the fire to roast your beans, and then you would then have to grind them, and this was the original coffee grinder, and this was made out of a burl walnut, and this was you put your beans in here, crank them in here, and then you pull out your coffee and put it in the pot. So that was quite a work of labor. And so then if you want to do your laundry, that wasn't an easy task either. This was the original washboard made out of wood, and it's probably from the 1700s, and this is the way they would wash their clothes by the river or in a tub of some sort. So that's rather intriguing. But then after you washed your clothes, you had to iron them, and this was a Mongol thread or mangling board. And these were often carved in elaborate style, and they usually had a horse handle, and then there was a big roller, and so you dampen your linens and then you would roll them back and forth like that to iron your linens. So everything was quite arduous in the way of labor. The story goes that the young men, when they would want to marry a young lady, would present this as a betrothal gift, and if she kept it, then they would get married. If she didn't like the guy, she'd give it back to him and he would go on to the next customer. Behind here are some old Norwegian trunks, and then if she did get married, she would wear a wedding crown like this. Some of them were silver and more elaborate, so the bride would wear this on the top of her head on her wedding day. Here we have old Dalarna horses and old Norwegian bulls, and these old trunks from Norway. Okay, here we have what's in German called Bauernstube, where the people would gather around the kitchen table and would have a bench, and this is very commonly found in Scandinavian countries, and as I said, this was from Norway, and I bought it at an estate sale, and it fitted in the corner here just perfectly. Here we have a copper coffee pot, and you see these all over Scandinavia, and this was a standard coffee pot. that was used, and they would take it to the woods or on picnics or cook with it at home. And this was the creamer, where there were a number of these little creamers here that they would take their cream in. This was another thing for washing. When you were down by the river or in a tub, you could pound the clothes with this and get them clean. And here we found an old whiskey container and from 1814, and that was to keep the Brennivine, the hard stuff, in. And up here are wonderful items. This is an old Norwegian piece here, an ale bowl with a dragon head on a typical Viking construction. And here is an old snooze box here with all carved Norwegian one. And here's an old container from the early 1800s. And this is from World War I, and it has the battles engraved on it with the date. And here we have what's called the snus duke, and this was where you kept your snuff or your chew or whatever, and I have a collection of those. Okay, here we have butter boxes, and so you would keep your butter in these containers. This was one I bought in 1960 in Norway. I think my first Scandinavian antique when I was traveling there. And again, they're same construction with the put together with bound together with the birch bark roots, and then of course the little wooden pegs at the bottom. Here's another one too, and they usually had designs and things of that sort on them. Now we're in the kitchen area, and here we have a very original whiskey container or branding container, all made of wood. It's probably from the 1700s, and that's a stopper here, and it's quite a unique item. Here is a coffee grinder, and over here, this is for making the hardtack for knäckebröd. And you see the basket, the knäcke hanging on the post there. That was the way they did put their knäcke there on the post to keep the mice out of them. And this would roll over here. So that was used for knäcke. This is interesting. These are from the Swedish restaurant that was here in Portland on the east side for many years. And this was called Little Bit of Sweden, and this was the plates they used to serve their customers. This is what is called a Lima trunk from the town of Lima in Dalarna, and it had a special color and design, and it's in really mint condition. I bought that in Sweden. This is a potato grinder, and that you would cook your potatoes, and then you would want to, after you cook them, you grind them up into this, and the potato mash would come out here, and you could stuff it into sausage or whatever you wanted to use it. So that is an original. And this is another item for making hardtack. This is a sampler given to me by Baroness Christina Fleetwood, and it's their family tree, and it's you see the different generations here, and it's quite ornately done. And the family were very good friends of mine, or still are actually. Okay, we're on our way upstairs to the balcony. We'll stop at the top of the steps here and take a brief look at some of my distinguished ancestors. The portrait of my great-great-grandfather, Magnus Christian Fogelquist, and his wife, Anna Christina Lickholm, were painted by a well-known portrait artist in Sweden in the 1830s. He owned estates in southern Sweden, or south of Stockholm, I should say, and then bought an estate in Mora in Dalarna in 1848. He was the superintendent of the marble mines, the big marble mines in Sweden, and worked there for a number of years. His wife's family actually owned the largest breweries in Sweden in the late 1800s and early 1900s. Then my great-grandfather was Johann Magnus Fogelquist, and he had larger land holdings on a farm in Mora, and his wife, Susanna Lickholm, was from this town of Orsa in Dalarna. These are my grandparents who had immigrated to America and first lived in Sioux City, Iowa, and then came to Sealy, Washington in 1908. This was another family member who was a police commissioner in Sweden. This is a braid from his uniform and the plume from his hat. And this is my father when he was young. And this is a great aunt, portrait of her. And this is another portrait of her here, Emma Fogelquist. Here is another end of the balcony. What's interesting here is an old birch bark backpack, and it's probably 150 years old. And this is what they would wear when they would go hiking or camping in Sweden. These are the straps are kind of interesting item. This is a beautiful old Norwegian 1850 birch burl cabinet. This is the old Fogelquist family Bible here. And here we have more trunks, Norwegian. And this trunk came over to St. Helens, Oregon in the 1880s with the pioneer family, Swedish pioneer immigrant family. Here we have more Tina boxes and containers, and a whiskey barrel made of wood. And this my father got from his cousins when he was a little boy in about 1902, from his cousins in Dalarna. It's a typical of the folk art costume, the vest, the apron that the men wore. And he got this from his cousins in Svedshov. Here is a chair. It was carved by his Swedish grandpa, Frederick Fogelquist, and it's made of cherry wood, and it's all carved. The wood is from his commercial orchard in Sealy, Washington. He made a number of decorative items you see around the home here. And this is the family tree here, and with all the different branches. And here we have more containers. This is a hat box. Women would put their bonnets in these when they would go to church or to a fancy wedding if the weather was stormy. So more Tinas, and this was a lunch basket made from wood, and it was brought on the boat when my grandmother's mother came over, immigrated from Sweden. in the 1880s. Okay, here we have a very old wall cabinet from Dalarna, Sweden, Rättvik Folk Art Designs, probably from the mid-1850s. Beautiful folk costume purse, and then inside, of course, it's cool inside. I have some very old Norwegian bowls and a wonderful tankard here. So that's interesting. And the clock is not Scandinavian, but it's a bit of Oregon history. That clock came out of the first Oregon Supreme Court chambers in Salem, Oregon. And I bought it from an estate. The people were friends of my folks in Salem. This is my bedroom, my rat's nest, who's generally not on house tours, but now that we're doing a solo show here, I can show you a bit of the things that I have here. This is a wonderful desk that belonged to my Swedish grandfather, and I inherited that. It's probably 130 years old. It's all mahogany and wood carved. This sword belonged to one of my ancestors, a Sundberg from the Ursa, Sweden, and it was an officer's sword from the Swedish cavalry, and so I'm happy to have that in my collection. This is an old German clock, inkstand, and so just other family pictures here and things of interest. Okay, this is another corner of my bedroom. There's a little Bavarian balcony out there, and this is a very old early American lampstand, and then I have a lovely Norwegian rug here and textiles hanging here and there, and then pictures of my favorite places in Europe where I've been many times. This is the bathroom here upstairs, and it's also decorated with a lot of old items and Scandinavian items. This is the guest room, and it is also a area where I have a lot of family things and Scandinavian things and things from other countries also. This certificate here is the wedding certificate of my Swedish grandparents when they were married in June 21st, 1896 in Sioux City, Iowa. And my Swedish grandpa made the frame for the wedding certificate. This is an old flax cutter, and I have a number of those. They used those to hack the flax, and then they would spin it into linen, and they were often highly decorated and with sometimes dates and initials on them. The pictures here is one of a country scene in Sweden. This is a miniature Mora clock here, and over here is an old cavalry sword from Sweden that belonged to my Swedish grandparents, and of course top hat I wear once in a while. Okay, here we have a beautiful French walnut antique bedroom set, and it with Italian marble tops. And this is a picture of my Swedish grandparents on their wedding day. This wonderful little chest was my Swedish grandpa made for my Swedish grandmother as a betrothal gift, and he presented that to her. And in here is a what his diary in here, and he wrote his about his trip to America in here, and it was very wonderful. And he wrote a lot of poetry too, and that was in this too. And this was a find that I discovered later at my grandparents' home. The chair is from the late 1600s, and it's very solid with nice wool socks. And so that's an interesting item. And I have a lot of textiles here, different ones from different parts of Sweden and Norway. Okay, here is the final shot here on the upstairs area. Here we have a fine Zorn print. Zorn painted my great aunt, my grandpa's sister, and her picture hangs in the Mora Museum, in the Zorn Museum in Mora. I have the picture, the copy. That was not original, but this is a signed one that I got here. And Zorn painted 3 U.S. presidents, and one of them still hangs in the White House. This is Kalmar, the city where my family came from, my Swedish grandmother family. This is my grandmother's mother, Emma Lundgren, and she looks like a pretty stern gal. This is another little holder with a wash beater here for washing clothes. This is a lovely picture that my Swedish grandparents had in their home, the Columbia Gorge, painted from Vista House, or in that area. Yes, this is an old tankard, another old tankard from Dalarna, from Mora. Okay, now let's go into the garden, and I'll show you around the facilities and the little Swedish stugor that are here around the house. And so let's go outside and take a look at Fogelbo on the exterior. The most recent addition to the property here at Fogelbo, it was built by the Forest Trolls, and it's basically a storage facility, but it's we have all our tractor and our tools and all the things for maintaining the grounds here. It was a very nice addition. We have a little garden here. We have the old tool grinder here, sharpener. So it's very nice looking, and the trolls did a great job. I hope you have enjoyed the tour of Fogelbo, the contents in my collection, and I want to wish you a very special greetings by tooting my Swedish lure from Dalarna. I'm not very good at tooting my horn, but sometimes I'm okay. And this is June 25th, 2020. So we hej då and ha det bra.